Chapter 1. The proposal at Ashbourne Hall. The summer of 1884 arrived with honeyed light and lilac-scented winds across the English countryside. Ashbourne Hall, the ancestral seat of the Ashbourne family, stood radiant beneath a sky the color of porcelain, its great windows aglow with candlelight that spilled over the manicured gardens below. The grand ballroom, decked in ivory and gold, hummed with the laughter of nobles and the rustle of silk gowns. The air was perfumed with roses and anticipation, for tonight the Vale heir would propose to Lady Charlotte Ashbourne. The Vale and Ashbourne families had been bound by friendship, politics, and property for nearly 2 generations. The union between Adrian Vale and Charlotte was the natural conclusion to that alliance, approved by their parents, whispered by society, and expected by all. Lord Adrian Vale was everything London admired in a gentleman: tall, impeccably mannered, and forged in the quiet discipline of old wealth. His dark hair, neatly brushed back, caught the glow of chandeliers as he stood beside his mother near the grand staircase. Yet there was a certain restlessness about him, a shadow that dimmed the sparkle in his grey eyes, as though the world offered him everything but what his heart truly sought. Charlotte Ashbourne, his intended, was a vision of grace. Her beauty was soft, her voice even softer, with flaxen hair arranged in delicate coils and a gown of pale blue satin that shimmered like morning mist. She embodied the serenity of a painting. She spoke little but smiled often, the kind of woman who made others feel at peace simply by existing. But it was her younger sister, Elena Ashbourne, who broke the calm of that evening, like wind through still water. Elena entered the ballroom late, laughing breathlessly as she slipped through the doorway, her cheeks flushed from some small adventure in the gardens. Her dark auburn hair, too wild for society's standards, framed a face alive with curiosity. Her gown, white muslin embroidered with tiny pearls, clung delicately to her as she moved, light as a sigh. Her presence drew glances, but none so deep as Adrian's. He turned as if compelled, his gaze seeking her in the crowd, even before he understood why. Charlotte, noticing her sister, waved her over warmly. "Elena, you've missed the first quadrille." "I lost track of time," Elena replied with an apologetic grin. "The nightingales were singing near the fountain. I had to listen a moment longer." Her mother sighed. "You'll never learn to behave like a lady of standing." Eleanor only curtsied playfully. "Then perhaps I shall behave like myself instead." Laughter rippled among the guests, and even Adrian's lips curved before he caught himself. From that moment, he was aware of her. Every time she spoke, laughed, or crossed the room, it was not admiration, not yet, rather an unfamiliar stirring, as though her voice had awakened something long dormant within him. As the evening wore on, music floated through the air, violins weaving melodies that shimmered like light on glass. Adrian led Charlotte through the waltz with practiced grace. She was calm in his arms, gentle as the rhythm itself. Yet when he glimpsed Elena on the edge of the dance floor, talking animatedly to a young officer, the world seemed to tilt ever so slightly. Later, when the musicians paused and champagne was poured, the murmur of expectation swept through the hall. Lord Vale, Adrian's father, lifted his glass and called for attention. "Friends," he declared, his voice carrying over the gathered crowd, "it brings me great joy to announce the union of 2 houses, Vale and Ashbourne, through the engagement of my son, Lord Adrian Vale, and the incomparable Lady Charlotte. Applause filled the room like thunder. Charlotte flushed, her gloved hand trembling slightly as Adrian took it. He knelt formally before her. The air held its breath. "Lady Charlotte," he said softly, "from the day I met you, I have admired your grace, your kindness, your unshakable composure. You embody every virtue I could hope to honor as a husband. Will you do me the great honor of becoming my wife?" Charlotte's eyes glistened. "Yes," she whispered. Cheers erupted. Glasses clinked. The orchestra struck up a joyful tune. And yet, amid the whirl of congratulations, Adrian's eyes sought something else. Someone else. He found her across the room. Eleanor stood very still near the French doors leading to the garden, her face partially turned away, her hands clasped before her, as though to still some emotion she could not show. When their eyes met, her expression was unreadable. Pride, pain, perhaps confusion. He looked away quickly, but the image of her lingered like a flame behind his eyelids. Later that night, as the celebration waned and the guests began to drift home, Eleanor slipped quietly into the gardens for air. The scent of wisteria hung thick in the summer heat. She pressed her hands against the cool stone balustrade, trying to calm the ache in her chest. The ache she refused to name. Footsteps approached behind her. "Elena," came his voice, low, uncertain. She turned, startled. "Lord Vale, I did not mean to startle you," he said, stopping a few paces away. The moonlight caught his profile, sharp and noble, the expression of a man who stood always between duty and desire. "You should be inside," she said, forcing a smile. "They'll be searching for you." "Perhaps," he replied quietly, "but I needed a moment to breathe." Eleanor nodded, glancing toward the ballroom's golden glow. "It was a beautiful proposal. Charlotte is radiant." "She is," he said, though the words came out too carefully. "She deserves every happiness." The silence that followed was not empty. It was charged, alive, as though the air itself held its breath between them. "You and she are very different," Adrian said finally, almost to himself. Elena's brow lifted. "Is that a compliment?" He hesitated. "It is an observation." She laughed softly. "Then I shall take it as neither." He smiled despite himself, the first genuine smile of the evening. For a brief instant, the world around them faded. The party, the expectations, the ring newly placed on Charlotte's hand. There was only the night breeze and the quiet recognition of something they both knew should not be. "I should return inside," she murmured, "before someone sees us." "Yes," he said, but did not move. For one suspended heartbeat, they simply looked at each other. And in that moment both understood that something irreversible had begun. When Elena finally turned and walked away, her footsteps light against the gravel path, Adrian remained where she had left him. The moon hung low, silvering the roses in the garden. He told himself it was only admiration, curiosity perhaps, nothing more. But as her laughter echoed faintly through the night, he knew that lie would not hold for long. Chapter 2. The quiet between them. The weeks that followed the proposal were a blur of preparations and polite excitement. Invitations were drafted, gowns ordered from London, and the Ashbourne Gardens transformed into a sea of roses in anticipation of the wedding to come. Lady Charlotte Ashbourne floated through it all with her customary composure, her smile gentle and unwavering. Every seamstress adored her. Every guest admired her modest grace. Society called her the perfect bride. and perhaps she was. But perfection, Elena thought, was a cold and lonely thing. Elena had always preferred the untamed edges of life. The overgrown gardens, the sound of rain against her window, the books that spoke of faraway storms and daring souls. Now, as her sister's wedding approached, she felt increasingly like an intruder in her own home, watching her family's joy through the fragile veil of duty. It began innocently enough. Charlotte had asked her for help with the decorations, 1,000 small tasks that required nimble hands and patience. "You always see beauty where I do not," Charlotte said fondly. "I want the day to feel alive, not simply correct." Eleanor agreed, and thus she found herself constantly in the company of Lord Adrian Vale, the man she ought never to have known beyond a courteous greeting. At first she kept her distance. She spoke only when necessary, offered polite smiles, and avoided his gaze. But fate, or perhaps irony, seemed intent on throwing them together at every turn. One morning, the drawing room was strewn with ribbons and lace as Elena arranged the floral designs for the ceremony. Adrian entered unannounced, carrying a letter from London for Charlotte. She was upstairs with the seamstress, so he lingered. "You're fond of flowers?" he said quietly, after watching her a moment. Elena didn't look up. "They don't ask for much," she replied. "Only light, water, and a little care. Most people ask for far more." He smiled faintly. "And yet they wither so quickly. Seems unfair." "Perhaps that's what makes them beautiful," she said. "They don't last." He studied her then, not with the idle curiosity of a man making conversation, but with the intentness of one trying to understand something just out of reach. "You speak as though you know what it is to wither," he murmured. Eleanor laughed softly. "Don't we all?" Before he could answer, Charlotte's voice floated down the staircase, bright and light as sunlight through glass. "Adrian, you've come. How lovely." Eleanor turned away at once, arranging flowers that did not need arranging. But when she felt his gaze linger 1 second too long, her hands trembled. That evening there was a dinner at the Vale estate, a formal affair meant to celebrate the joining of their two families. Adrian's mother, the elegant but formidable Lady Marianne Vale, oversaw every detail with meticulous precision. The long dining table gleamed with silver and crystal. The conversation was polite, practiced. Charlotte sat beside Adrian, glowing with quiet happiness. Eleanor, seated opposite, found herself caught between fascination and guilt. Every time Adrian spoke, his voice low and deliberate, she listened without meaning to. He was not a man who filled silence carelessly. His words carried weight, as though he considered them gifts. And when he laughed, which was rare, it was genuine. At one point, Charlotte excused herself to speak with Lady Vale about the guest list, leaving Adrian momentarily unoccupied. Eleanor tried to focus on her plate, but his voice broke the hush between them. "Do you find such gatherings tiresome, Lady Eleanor?" She met his gaze warily. "Sometimes, but perhaps that's ungrateful of me." He shook his head. "It's honest." She smiled, almost against her will. "Honesty isn't often welcome in drawing rooms." "Then perhaps we should both be unwelcome," he said softly. Her breath caught. The words were too easy, too dangerous. She looked down at her hands, the candlelight trembling across her skin. When Charlotte returned, conversation flowed again, but the damage was done. Something unseen had shifted. a thread pulled taut between them, humming just beneath the surface of propriety. Days turned into weeks. The summer ripened into late August. Preparations consumed every hour, and yet between the noise and bustle, small, stolen moments began to bloom. A glance shared across the breakfast table, a quiet word exchanged as she passed him a quill, the faint brush of his fingers when they both reached for the same ribbon. Each time, Eleanor reminded herself, he belongs to Charlotte, but her heart did not obey. One afternoon she found him alone in the library. The room was dim, the air rich, with the scent of old paper and dust. He stood by the window, reading a letter with furrowed brow. "Another letter from London?" she asked, surprising herself by speaking. He looked up, startled, then folded the paper carefully. "Yes, business with my father. He believes a man should think only of estate matters. And you? I think," he said slowly, "that life must be more than inheritance and expectation." She tilted her head. "You sound like someone longing to escape his own name." He met her eyes, the corners of his mouth softening. "Perhaps I am." There was a long pause. The rain began to patter softly against the windows, turning the world outside to silver. "Do you ever think," he asked, "that we live the lives others choose for us?" "All the time," she said quietly, "but I'm not brave enough to change mine." He took a step closer, his voice low. "You seem braver than most people I know." Her breath trembled. The space between them felt impossibly small. She could hear the rain, his heartbeat, the faint crackle of the fire, and then footsteps in the hall. They both turned just as Charlotte entered, smiling. "Ah, there you are," she said brightly. "Elena, Mama needs your opinion on the table linens." "Of course," Elena managed, her cheeks burning. She fled the room before her heart betrayed her further. That night, Elena sat at her writing desk, the moonlight pale on her letters. She dipped her quill, paused, and began to write. "I wish I had never met him." She stared at the words until her vision blurred, then tore the paper to shreds. The following morning brought clearer skies, but the air between them remained heavy with everything unsaid. Adrian kept his distance, more out of fear than restraint. He told himself he loved Charlotte, or at least that he could grow to. She was good, kind, deserving of a man's loyalty, but it was Elena who haunted him. Her laughter echoed in his mind long after she left a room. Her eyes, so alive and searching, followed him in every quiet moment. He began to dread and crave her presence in equal measure. One afternoon, as preparations drew near completion, Eleanor stood on the terrace overlooking the lake. The sunlight caught the ripples in her hair, setting them aflame. Adrian approached without meaning to, his footsteps soft on the stone. She turned at once. "Lord Vale." "Eleanor," he said, and the way he spoke her name made her heart falter. "You shouldn't." "I know," she swallowed. "Charlotte?" "I know," he said again, voice thick with struggle. "God forgive me. I know." For a moment, neither moved. The world seemed to hold its breath. The breeze, the leaves, even the water below. And then, as if sensing the danger of that silence, she stepped back. "Please," she whispered, "don't make this harder than it already is." He bowed his head, unable to answer. When she turned away, the ache that filled him was sharper than any wound. He watched her go, the folds of her gown fluttering like pale wings, until she disappeared into the sunlight, leaving him with only the quiet and the unbearable truth. He was engaged to her sister, but his eyes always found her. Chapter 3. A storm and a secret autumn came to the countryside like a sigh, soft, golden, and heavy with endings. Leaves burned to amber on the trees surrounding Ashbourne Hall, and the once endless days of summer were replaced by misty mornings and fires crackling in the hearth. The date of the wedding had been set for November, and the house buzzed with constant preparations, tailors arriving, guests expected, and the rustle of gowns echoing down every hallway. Lady Charlotte moved through it all in gentle delight, blissfully unaware of the silent war being waged in the hearts around her. Eleanor had tried, truly tried, to forget. She buried herself in tasks, rode in the mornings, read by candlelight late into the night. She avoided Adrian Vale whenever possible, though avoiding him entirely was impossible. For his part, Adrian had become quiet and withdrawn, his smiles forced, his letters to London unanswered. His father, Lord Vale, noticed but said nothing. Men of their station did not discuss matters of the heart, but hearts have their own ways of making themselves heard. It happened on a day when the world seemed poised on the edge of change. Charlotte had fallen ill with a mild fever, confined to her room by her mother's insistence. The weather had turned unsettled, clouds rolling in thick and low, promising rain. Adrian had planned to return to Vale Manor that evening, a short journey by carriage across the hills. Eleanor had been asked to send along a small parcel Charlotte had intended as a gift for his mother. "You'll have to catch him before he leaves," her mother said. "He's due to depart within the hour." Eleanor wrapped the parcel carefully and hurried down the drive. The sky was already darkening, wind whipping at the trees. She found Adrian by the stables, speaking with his coachman. "Lord Vale," she called, breathless. "You forgot this." He turned, surprised. "Elena, Lady Elena," he corrected, catching himself. "You shouldn't be out in this weather." "It hasn't begun yet," she said, holding out the parcel. "Charlotte asked me to—" A sharp crack split the air. Thunder, close and sudden. Both looked up as the first heavy drops began to fall. Adrian frowned at the sky. "That storm's coming fast. It'll be dangerous on the road." His coachman shook his head. "Begging your pardon, my lord, but the bridge by the East Road will flood within the hour. We'd best wait it out." Adrian glanced toward the horizon, where lightning flickered pale and distant. "We can shelter at the old hunting lodge near the hill," he decided. "It's closer than either estate." He turned to Elena. "You should come. The rain will be on us before you reach the hall." "I'll be fine." But a violent gust of wind scattered her words, and the sky opened in a sudden torrent. Within seconds, she was drenched. Adrian took her hand without hesitation. "Come," he said firmly. "There's no time to argue." The storm swallowed the countryside whole. By the time they reached the hunting lodge, a small stone refuge tucked at the edge of the forest, both were soaked to the skin, their clothes clinging, their breath visible in the cold. Adrian forced the door open, and they stumbled inside, laughing breathlessly, despite the thunder outside. It was a single-room cabin, long unused but sturdy. A hearth stood at one end, a scattering of old furniture draped in dust sheets. Adrian found matches and struck a flame, coaxing it to life until the fire crackled and spread its warmth. Eleanor removed her damp gloves, shivering. "Here," he said, handing her a blanket he found in a chest. "You'll catch your death." She smiled faintly. I've survived worse. He arched a brow. Rebellious sisters are not supposed to run through thunderstorms. Perhaps not, she said softly, drawing the blanket closer. But I've never been very good at doing what I'm supposed to. He looked at her for a long moment. The firelight painted her skin gold, catching the droplets of rain still tangled in her hair. Something about the sight struck him like a blow. That wild, ungoverned spirit he'd tried so hard to ignore. He turned away, busying himself with the fire. You must think me a fool, he said finally. For what? For agreeing to a match the world expects, rather than one my heart might choose. Her pulse quickened. Lord Vale, you shouldn't say such things. I know. The rain pounded harder against the roof. She moved closer to the fire, her voice trembling. Charlotte loves you. I know that too. He looked up then, and their eyes met. And I wish I could love her as she deserves. She shook her head. Don't. But he stepped closer, his words breaking past restraint. Do you think I haven't tried to stay away from you? Every day I tell myself to forget you, and every day my eyes betray me. Her breath hitched. Please, she whispered, don't say it. I must, he said, voice rough, because it's the only truth I have left. The silence between them burned hotter than the fire. The storm outside raged, wind howling through the cracks in the wood. He reached out slowly, as if giving her time to turn away. When she didn't, his hand brushed her cheek, his touch trembling. Elena, he said softly, as though her name itself was sacred. Her eyes closed. You're engaged to my sister. I know, he breathed, and yet, God help me, I can't look at you and feel anything but this. She stepped back, the blanket slipping from her shoulders. This cannot happen, he swallowed hard. No, it cannot. For a moment it seemed the spell would break, that they would retreat into silence, into reason. But then she looked up, and he saw the tears she had been holding back, and everything rational in him fell away. Their lips met, hesitant and desperate, as the thunder rolled above them. It was not passion in its reckless form, but a release of everything they had tried so hard to bury. Longing, fear, guilt, and the unbearable ache of what could never be. When they broke apart, both were breathless, shaken. This never happened, she whispered. Promise me. He nodded, though his voice failed him. It never happened. They sat apart after that, she by the window, he by the fire, as the storm passed into quiet, both trapped in the same silence, hearing the same confession echo in their minds. When dawn broke grey and cold, they left the lodge without a word. The world outside smelled of rain and earth, washed clean, but neither felt clean within. By the time they returned to Ashbourne Hall, servants were rushing about in panic. Lady Elena, the housekeeper cried. Where have you been? We feared you'd been caught in the flood. Charlotte, pale but recovering from her fever, came down the stairs at the sound of her sister's name. Elena, she exclaimed, running forward. You're safe. Elena forced a smile. Only a bit of rain. Adrian bowed stiffly. Forgive the delay. The storm made travel impossible. Charlotte's relief was genuine and deep. You were together? The question lingered like smoke. Adrian's answer was steady, practiced. For shelter only. The road was impassable. Charlotte smiled. innocent, trusting. Then I'm doubly glad you weren't alone. Eleanor's heart broke quietly in that moment. That night she sat before her mirror, brushing her hair with slow, unsteady strokes. The reflection staring back at her looked the same, but she knew something within her had changed forever. In another part of the house, Adrian stood by his window, staring into the rain-soaked gardens. His hand tightened around the sill. They had promised silence, but the storm had left its mark, and some secrets, once born, refused to sleep quietly. Chapter 4. The engagement unravels. The storm had passed, but its shadow lingered. At Ashbourne Hall, the days resumed their polite rhythm. Teas, fittings, calls from neighboring families. Yet beneath the veneer of normalcy, something fragile had cracked. Elena and Adrian avoided each other, as though proximity itself were dangerous. When they met by chance in the corridors, they exchanged formal nods, nothing more. But even silence can betray too much, and for those who look closely enough, eyes speak volumes. Charlotte noticed first. At breakfast one morning, she glanced between her fiancé and her sister, her gentle smile faltering just slightly. "You two have been rather quiet lately," she said lightly. "Did the storm frighten you both so terribly?" Adrian smiled faintly. "Only my horse, I assure you." Elena looked down at her tea. "The weather was memorable." Charlotte laughed. "Well, I'm only glad you both returned safely. Mama said the river nearly swept away the bridge." Her words were harmless, her laughter soft, and yet beneath them, Adrian felt the faintest tremor of guilt. A reminder that innocence could be cruel simply by existing. As the weeks passed, gossip began to stir. At first it was nothing. Whispers that Lord Vale seemed distracted, that Lady Charlotte's younger sister spent too much time at Ashbourne, despite society's disapproval of unmarried women loitering during courtship. But gossip is like fire. Once sparked, it spreads unseen until it consumes everything in its path. One afternoon, Lady Vale arrived unexpectedly from London, her expression tight with barely concealed irritation. "I received word," she said coldly, "that my son has been seen walking unchaperoned with Lady Elena in the gardens twice." Charlotte's mother flushed scarlet. "Surely that is an exaggeration. Elena would never—" "I make no accusations," Lady Vale interrupted, "but with the wedding so near, even the smallest impropriety becomes fuel for rumor." Elena stood nearby, frozen. She wanted to protest, but Charlotte turned toward her with eyes wide and wounded. "Is it true?" she asked softly. Eleanor shook her head. "We only spoke once or twice about the wedding." Charlotte's lips trembled, then curved in a small, uncertain smile. "Then I have nothing to fear." She believed her, or wanted to. Adrian, however, knew the truth was not so easily silenced. He spent sleepless nights pacing the Vale library, torn between loyalty and torment. The thought of Charlotte's heartbreak filled him with shame, yet the memory of Elena's eyes, her voice in the storm, haunted him like a ghost that would not leave. He wrote letters, then burned them. He tried to pray, but no words came. One evening, Charlotte sat at her writing desk, humming softly as she addressed invitations. Adrian watched her from the window, guilt twisting in his chest. She looked so peaceful, unaware of the secret that would shatter her world if spoken aloud. He turned to leave, but her voice stopped him. "Adrian," she said gently, "do you love me?" The question struck like an arrow. He hesitated too long. "I do," he said finally, but even to his own ears, the words sounded hollow. Charlotte's quill stilled. She looked up, eyes glistening. "Then why do you look at me as though you're apologizing?" He had no answer. The silence between them was unbearable. "You've changed," she whispered, "since the storm, since—" She paused, then shook her head. "I must be imagining things." He wanted to deny it, to reach for her hand to assure her that nothing had changed, but he could not lie convincingly anymore. Not to her, not to himself. The truth, when it came, arrived in the cruelest of ways. A week later, Elena's chambermaid found a letter that had fallen behind her writing desk. A letter she had begun the night after the storm and never finished. Torn, unsent, half-written, but damning enough. The servant, not understanding its weight, passed it innocently to Lady Ashbourne. By the next evening, the entire household knew. The letter was placed on Charlotte's vanity, its words trembling in ink. "I wish I could forget the sound of his voice in the storm. I wish I could erase the moment we lost our reason." No name was written, none needed. Charlotte's scream echoed through the corridors of Ashbourne Hall that night, sharp and shattering as glass. Eleanor rushed to her chamber, terrified. "Charlotte, what happened?" Her sister turned on her, pale as marble, the crumpled letter in her hand. "You—" Eleanor froze. "How could you?" Charlotte whispered, her voice breaking. "He was mine. He was promised to me. Charlotte, please. It wasn't. I never meant—" "Don't lie to me!" Charlotte cried. Tears streamed down her face, but her anger burned fiercer. My sister! You've destroyed everything!" Eleanor fell to her knees, sobbing. "It was one moment. A mistake. A mistake." Charlotte's laughter was wild, hollow. "You call betrayal a mistake?" Adrian burst into the room then, breathless, his face ashen. "Charlotte, don't!" she hissed, stepping back. "Not one more word. I've seen enough." She threw the letter at his feet and fled, her sobs fading down the hall. The silence that followed was worse than the storm itself. Adrian stood frozen, the weight of ruin pressing on his chest. "Eleanor, go," she said hoarsely. "Please, just go." But he didn't move. He knelt, picked up the torn letter, his eyes stinging. "I never wanted this," he whispered. "Neither did I," she said, voice trembling. "But wanting doesn't change what is." By dawn, the engagement was broken. Lady Vale demanded her son return home at once. Lord Ashbourne refused to speak to him. Society buzzed with scandal before the week's end. Whispers of impropriety, betrayal, ruined prospects. Charlotte locked herself in her room for days. Eleanor was forbidden to see her. When she finally tried, her sister turned her face away. "Leave," Charlotte whispered, her voice hollow. "I never wish to see you again." That night, Eleanor packed her trunk. She stood one last time at her bedroom window, gazing over the moonlit gardens where everything had begun. The laughter, the glances, the impossible longing. She pressed her hand to the glass as if to leave behind some trace of herself. A carriage waited in the drive, bound north for Scotland, where their widowed aunt kept a quiet estate. Adrian came in secret to see her off. "Elena," he said, voice raw, "let me come with you." She shook her head. "You can't. You belong here, to your family, to your name." "I belong to you," he said. "I have from the first moment." Tears shimmered in her eyes. "Then forget me, Adrian, for both our sakes." She turned away before he could speak again, stepped into the carriage, and did not look back. He stood there long after the wheels had vanished down the misty road, his heart heavy with everything lost. The wedding rings were returned, the invitations destroyed, two families fell into silence, and love, that fragile, forbidden thing, was buried beneath duty and regret, or so they believed. Chapter 5. Exile and Longing. The road to Scotland was long and grey. Elena Ashbourne sat in the corner of the carriage, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her eyes unseeing as the countryside blurred past. Each mile carried her farther from the ruin she had wrought, from the sister she had betrayed, from the man she could not forget. She told herself she deserved the exile. Ashbourne Hall had been her world. The polished corridors, the laughter of her youth, Charlotte's gentle teasing. Now it was all ashes. The letter she had never meant to send had done what neither courage nor cowardice could have accomplished. It had torn 3 lives apart. Her aunt's estate in Perthshire stood upon a windswept moor, isolated and weathered by time. The woman herself, Lady Agatha Mowbray, was kind, though stern. She welcomed her niece with cautious sympathy. "You have the look of someone who's fled rather than travelled," she said the first evening as they sat before the fire. Elena smiled faintly. "Both, perhaps." Lady Agatha nodded. "The world can be unkind to those who love in defiance of it." The words struck deep, though Eleanor gave no sign. She rose each morning before dawn, walked the moors in silence, and busied herself with small tasks, tending the garden, reading, sketching, yet her heart refused to quiet. Sometimes, when the wind was still, she imagined she could hear his voice, soft, calling her name across the distance. In London, the scandal refused to die. The engagement between Lord Adrian Vale and Lady Charlotte Ashbourne had been the talk of the season. Its sudden dissolution, a sensation. Society's whispers were crueler than any blade. "Betrayed by her own sister," murmured the tongue. "How utterly tragic." Lady Vale withdrew from public life, her pride wounded beyond repair. The Vale family name, once uttered with admiration, became a subject of pity. As for Adrian, he moved through the days like a ghost. He performed his duties, estate business, correspondence, meetings, but nothing touched him. The world that once held colour now seemed drained of life. He thought often of Scotland, of Elena, alone among the heather and mist. He imagined her eyes reflecting the grey of the sky, her hair caught by the wind. The longing was unbearable, but so was the guilt. He had broken Charlotte's heart. That fact could not be undone. Still, one night he took up his pen. "Elena, I have tried to obey reason, but it brings no peace. Every day I wake with your name on my lips. If this letter never reaches you, perhaps that is mercy. But if it does, know that I would cross any distance, face any ruin, only to see you once more." He sealed the letter and stared at it for a long time. Then, with a sigh that sounded like surrender, he cast it into the fire. Some truths were safer burned. The seasons turned. By winter, snow blanketed the Scottish hills, and the world seemed to sleep. Eleanor spent the evenings by the fire, embroidering or reading aloud to her aunt. Outwardly, she appeared calm. Inwardly, she counted every heartbeat that did not belong to him. One night, she found herself sketching his face by candlelight. The strong lines, the haunted eyes, the mouth that had once whispered her name. She tore the page to pieces before dawn. Her aunt noticed the shadows beneath her eyes. "You are too young to live as if life were over," Lady Agatha said one morning. Eleanor smiled sadly. Perhaps some hearts do not survive their first breaking. Then you must make it survive, her aunt said firmly. The world will not wait for your sorrow to fade. It was advice Eleanor wanted to follow, but could not. In the spring, word came from the south. Charlotte was to be married. Not to Adrian, that chapter was closed forever, but to a viscount, a family friend who had long admired her. The match was respectable, even advantageous. Elena read the letter twice, her vision blurring, relief mingled with grief. Her sister was healing, and yet, in that healing, it felt as though the last thread connecting them was gone. She wrote a note of blessing, simple and sincere, but received no reply. Still, she prayed her sister would find peace where she could not. Months later, fate stirred again. A letter arrived, sealed with the Vale crest. Elena froze as her aunt handed it to her. Her heart pounded as she broke the seal, but the handwriting was not Adrian's, it was his mother's. Lady Elena, you will forgive the intrusion, I trust, for I write not as a countess, but as a mother. My son is unwell. He has taken ill since the dissolution of his engagement, and though physicians speak of fever and exhaustion, I know his ailment is of the spirit. If you have any kindness left for him, I beg you, write to him a few words, nothing more. You need not sign your name, only let him know that he is not despised. Lady Vale. Eleanor read the letter again and again, tears burning her eyes. She wanted to refuse. She wanted to stay silent, as she had sworn she would. But love is not a thing that obeys vows. That night she lit a candle and took up her pen. Adrian, I have heard of your illness. I wish you strength, though I have no right to. Whatever pain my presence caused, I pray time has lessened it. Remember the moors after the storm, the way the air cleared, the sky returned to blue. You will see such skies again. She sealed it without an address, trusting fate to carry it where it must. In London, Adrian woke one morning to find an envelope on his desk. There was no name, only a familiar hand. He opened it, and for the first time in many months, he smiled. The fever that had plagued him for weeks broke that very night. When Lady Vale found him standing by the window, the pale light touching his face, she knew something within her son had changed. "You're leaving, aren't you?" she said quietly. He turned toward her, his voice steady. "I must." She nodded once, though her eyes glistened. "Then go, and may you find what peace you can." By early summer, a lone rider approached Lady Agatha's estate. Elena was in the garden, gathering lavender, when she heard the sound of hooves. She turned, and the basket fell from her hands. He dismounted slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. For a long moment, neither spoke. The world seemed to hold its breath. "Elena," he said softly. Her lips parted, but no sound came. He took a step closer. "I tried to forget," he whispered. "God knows I tried." She trembled. "You shouldn't have come. I couldn't stay away." "Charlotte, she's married," he said gently. "Happy, I think. The world has moved on. Only I have not." She looked away, tears falling freely. "And what do you hope to find here, Adrian?" "Only the truth," he said. "That love, even broken, still lives." He reached for her hand. For the first time since the night of the storm, she didn't pull away. The scent of lavender drifted through the air. Neither spoke again for a long while. That evening they walked along the edge of the moor, the sun sinking behind the hills in gold and rose. So much was lost. Elena murmured. Yes, Adrian said, but not all, not this. She looked up at him, and in his eyes she saw not the haunted man she had once known, but something gentler, something healed. And when he kissed her, it was not with the desperation of forbidden love, but with the quiet certainty of two souls who had survived their own ruin. Chapter 6. The Return to Ashbourne. The summer of 1819 was unseasonably warm. The air shimmered over the fields, heavy with the scent of roses, and for the first time in years, Ashbourne Hall opened its gates to celebration rather than whispers. Lady Charlotte Vale, once Ashbourne, now Viscountess Greystone, was to host a midsummer gathering in honor of her husband's new commission. Invitations spread through the county like pollen, bearing a name that once drew pity, now admiration. Charlotte had rebuilt her life with quiet determination. Her husband, Viscount Henry Greystone, was kind and patient, never pressing her to smile when she could not, never asking about the past she kept locked away. Over time she had learned to laugh again, though sometimes in the quiet hours a shadow crossed her gaze when the wind rose or the rain fell. It was Henry who first suggested inviting her sister. "She has lived in seclusion long enough," he said gently. "Let her come home, Charlotte. Whatever passed is long behind us." Charlotte hesitated. "You do not know what it cost me to forgive." He smiled softly. "Then let your forgiveness be complete." And so the invitation was sent, sealed with the Greystone crest and written in Charlotte's delicate hand. Eleanor received it one morning at the breakfast table. Lady Agatha looked up from her tea. "Well?" Eleanor's fingers trembled as she unfolded the parchment. The words were brief but unmistakably sincere. "Dearest Elena, I wish to see you. If your heart allows, come to Ashbourne for midsummer. The past need not bind us forever. Your sister, Charlotte." Eleanor stared at the letter for a long time, her heart tight. She had imagined this moment 1,000 times, her sister's forgiveness, her return, but in her imagination, it always ended in tears or silence. "I cannot go," she whispered. "You must," Lady Agatha said. "Not for her, nor for him, for yourself. You cannot build a life on regret." Eleanor looked toward the window, where the morning light touched the moors in gold. "Will he be there?" Her aunt gave her a knowing glance. "If he still draws breath, my dear, he will come." The carriage rolled into Ashbourne 3 days later. The estate looked almost unchanged. The same ivy climbing the stone walls, the same oaks swaying in the summer breeze, and yet it felt different. The ghosts that had once haunted its halls seemed quieter now, subdued by time. When Eleanor stepped out, she saw her sister waiting at the top of the stairs. For a moment neither moved. Then Charlotte descended slowly, her gown pale blue, her face serene. "Elena," she said softly. Elena tried to speak, but emotion choked her. "Charlotte, Her sister closed the distance between them and drew her into an embrace. "No words," Charlotte whispered. "We have both suffered enough." Eleanor clung to her, tears blurring the world. When they pulled apart, Charlotte smiled faintly. "You haven't changed." "You have," Eleanor said. "You're stronger." "Pain makes us so," Charlotte replied. They spent the afternoon walking the gardens, speaking carefully at first, then more freely. The laughter that once bound them returned in fragments, cautious but real. As the sun dipped low, Charlotte hesitated. "Adrian will be here tomorrow." Eleanor froze. "He's coming?" Charlotte nodded. "Henry insisted. He said the past must be faced if peace is to last." Her eyes softened. I no longer hate him, Eleanor, or you. I did once, but hate is exhausting. Eleanor's voice trembled. I never wanted to hurt you. I know. Charlotte's smile was sad but kind, and that's why I can forgive. The following evening, the guests arrived, carriages gleaming, laughter echoing across the lawn. Music floated from the ballroom, and lanterns glowed among the roses. Eleanor stood at the edge of it all, her gown a soft cream that caught the candlelight like water. She felt strangely apart, as though watching her own life from a distance. Then through the crowd she saw him, Adrian Vale. He looked older, his shoulders broader, his expression tempered by years of silence. But his eyes, those eyes still found her as though no time had passed at all. Their gazes locked, the world seemed to fall away. He crossed the floor slowly, each step deliberate. The murmurs around them faded. Elena, he said at last, his voice low, reverent. Adrian, he searched her face, almost afraid she might vanish. I wasn't sure you'd come. Nor I you, she whispered. They stood there, suspended between past and present. Then Charlotte approached, her husband by her side. For a moment, tension hung like a drawn bow, but Charlotte extended her hand to Adrian with quiet grace. It's good to see you again, she said simply. Adrian bowed his head. You are kinder than I deserve. Perhaps, she said, but forgiveness has its own reward. Henry smiled, glancing between them. You see, midsummer works its magic. Charlotte laughed softly, and for the first time in years, all four shared a moment of peace. Later that night, as the music drifted through the open terrace doors, Elena stepped outside. The air was warm, the stars scattered bright across the sky. She heard footsteps behind her, steady, familiar. You always flee the noise, Adrian said quietly. She smiled faintly. And you always follow. He came to stand beside her. I meant to speak earlier, but there were too many eyes. Then speak now, she whispered. He drew a slow breath. When I came to Scotland, I thought to find closure. Instead, I found home. Her heart trembled. And now I ask what future we might have. If forgiveness truly extends to us as well. She looked up at him, her eyes glistening. You would risk the world's judgment again? I no longer live for the world, he said softly, only for what gives my life meaning. A breeze stirred the lanterns. The music inside swelled. A waltz, tender and slow. He extended his hand. Dance with me, Elena. She hesitated only a heartbeat before placing her hand in his. They moved in silence, the moonlight wrapping around them like silk. For once there were no stolen glances, no shame, no secrecy, only two hearts that had weathered the worst of storms and still found their way back. When the song ended, he brushed a tear from her cheek. Stay, he whispered. No more goodbyes. She smiled, a smile that reached her soul. Yes. Days later, when the guests had departed and the hall was quiet again, Charlotte found her sister in the garden, laughter in her eyes. You're leaving with him, aren't you? Elena nodded. He's asked me to live at Vale House, not as his secret this time, but as his wife. Charlotte studied her for a long moment, then smiled through her tears. Then go and be happy. One of us should be. Eleanor embraced her tightly. I wish you happiness too, Lottie. Always. I have it, Charlotte said softly, in knowing we all survived. That autumn, the bells of St. James rang over the countryside as Lord Adrian Vale wed Lady Elena Ashbourne in a quiet ceremony attended by family and a handful of true friends. There were no grand announcements, no fanfare, only peace. When they returned to Vale House, Adrian took her hand as they walked through the great hall, sunlight streaming through the high windows. "This place was empty without you," he said. "It isn't empty anymore," she whispered, and as the doors closed behind them, the past, with all its pain, longing, and regret, faded into memory. Years later, visitors to Vale House would often remark upon the portrait that hung in the library, a lady seated by the window, sunlight in her hair, her gaze distant yet alive. When asked who she was, Lord Vale would smile faintly and say, "The woman who taught me that love, when true, endures even through ruin." And in every gathering, no matter how crowded, his eyes always found her, just as they had from the very beginning. Chapter 7. The Confession Beneath the Winter Sky. Winter returned to England with quiet majesty. The frost lay thick upon the hills, and the trees stood bare and silver against the pale horizon. At Vale House, a hush had fallen, not the silence of sorrow, but of peace. The scandal that had once consumed two families was now little more than a fading whisper in the salons of London. Years had done what reason could not, softened the sharp edges of memory, but some truths remain unspoken until the heart can bear their weight. Eleanor stood by the great window overlooking the snow-covered gardens. She wore a simple wool gown, her hair braided loosely, a faint smile touching her lips as she watched the flakes drift like feathers against the glass. Behind her, the fire crackled softly. Adrian entered quietly, carrying a folded letter. "A message from Ashbourne," he said, his voice gentle. She turned, surprised. "From Charlotte?" He nodded. "She writes that she and Henry are expecting a child." Eleanor's breath caught, joy and melancholy mingling in her chest. "She will be a wonderful mother." "She thanks you," Adrian added. "She says your last letter, your words of forgiveness, gave her peace." Eleanor smiled faintly. "Then we are both forgiven at last?" He crossed the room, stopping beside her. The firelight touched his face, and she saw how time had changed him. The faint lines at the corners of his eyes, the silver just beginning at his temples, but his gaze was still the same, steady, searching, full of quiet devotion. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked suddenly. "Regret," she echoed softly. "That night," he said, "the storm, everything that came after." She looked back toward the window, her reflection ghostly in the glass. "I have thought of it often. There were days when I cursed it, when I would have given anything to undo that moment. But without it, we would have lived half lives, bound by duty and fear. We would have looked at each other across rooms and never known what it was to love completely." He took her hand, his thumb brushing against her wrist. "And yet we hurt so many." "Yes," she whispered, "we did, but we also learned what it means to be human." He smiled, a weary, tender smile. "You always find the light, even in ruin." "Perhaps," she said, "because ruin taught me where to look." That evening, the sky turned the color of pewter. Snow fell thicker, soft and relentless. Elena stepped outside, drawn by something unspoken, a pull she couldn't name. She walked across the frozen garden, her breath forming clouds in the air. The old stone bridge that spanned the river lay ahead, half buried in snow. It was there, years ago, that Adrian had first spoken her name with something dangerous in his voice. It was there their fates had begun to tangle. She paused at the railing, her gloved hands dusted with frost. The river below moved in slow, dark currents. Behind Behind her, she heard footsteps crunching in the snow. Adrian joined her silently, his coat lined with frost, his breath visible in the cold air. For a long while they said nothing. Finally he spoke. "Do you remember this place?" She nodded. "How could I forget? It was here that everything changed." He looked out at the river, his voice low. "I've often wondered if I had chosen differently that night, if I had walked away, what would have become of us?" Eleanor turned to him, her eyes luminous in the dim light. "You would have married Charlotte. I would have been sent away to some dull house in the country, and we would have lived politely and died quietly. And you would have been content?" She shook her head. "Never." A faint smile touched his lips. "Nor I." The wind picked up, swirling the snow around them in a gentle storm. She stepped closer. "Adrian, there is something I never told you." He met her gaze. "What is it?" "When I left for Scotland," she said softly, "I thought I was being noble. I told myself I was saving you from disgrace, from ruin. But the truth is, I was afraid of how much I loved you, afraid that if I stayed, I would lose myself completely." Her voice trembled, but she didn't look away. "You were never just a man to me. You were the mirror in which I saw everything I feared and desired, and I hated you for it, for making me see what I truly was." Adrian's throat tightened. "And what were you?" "Alive," she whispered. "Terribly, wonderfully alive." For a long moment, they simply stood there, two souls stripped bare beneath the winter sky. Then he spoke, his voice rough with emotion. "When I lost you, I thought I had been punished, but now I see it was grace, that we needed to be broken before we could understand love without possession, without pride." Snow gathered in his hair, melted against her cheek as he brushed away a tear. "Elena," he said quietly, "I spent years trying to atone for what we did, but the truth is, I would choose it again. Every sin, every sorrow, if it meant finding you." She closed her eyes, tears spilling freely now. "Then let this be our confession, Adrian, before the heavens, before the ghosts of all we wronged. We loved, and it was imperfect, and it was real." He took her hands in his, drawing her close. Their breath mingled in the cold, the snow falling soft as blessings. "Then let this be our absolution," he murmured, and beneath the winter sky he kissed her, not with the hunger of youth, but with the quiet reverence of a man who had learned what it cost to love truly. The snow fell harder, wrapping them in white silence. Later, as the fire burned low and night deepened around Vale House, Adrian stood by the window once more. The stars glittered faintly beyond the frost. Eleanor approached, resting a hand on his shoulder. "What are you thinking?" she asked. He smiled without turning. "That we began beneath these same stars, and that perhaps they have been waiting all this time for us to forgive ourselves." She leaned against him, her head on his chest, and together they watched the snow drift across the gardens, the ruins of their past, buried at last beneath a perfect, shining silence. Years later, when the snows came each December, Lord and Lady Vale would walk the same bridge together, their footsteps soft against the frost. Sometimes he would stop, take her hand, and say with a smile, "Do you remember?" And she would nod, her eyes bright with peace. "I remember, and I forgive." And above them, the stars that had once borne witness to their forbidden love now seemed to shimmer with approval, eternal, unjudging, and kind.